Hello, everybody. Mike Walker here. Today, we're going to be talking about Gartner's Emerging Technologies Hype Cycle for 2020. Now, on a previous episode, we went deep into the hype cycle as a construct and kind of give the end-to-end explainer on what it means, some of the subtleties, how to use it, etc. We didn't cover in that explanation, though, some of the technology profiles that would get plotted on the hype cycle. Instead, I thought it'd be a bit more valuable if we actually walked through an example of one of those over 100 hype cycles, and this one being a fairly unique one. I thought, this would be probably the best way to articulate some of the subtleties of the hype cycle. So we're going to go deeper on the emerging tech hype cycle. Now, if you're wondering, I used to work for Gartner at once upon a time. I actually wrote the emerging technologies hype cycle for a number of years as well. And so intimately familiar with the process on, why some of these technologies are on this list, and maybe more importantly, why are some technologies not on that list? And so I think a good place to start is definitionally. What is a emerging technologies hype cycle? Now, the emerging technology hype cycle is very unique in that in the first bit of this definition, it distills the must-know emerging technologies and trends. So how this is unique is that many of the other hype cycles focus on a particular area. So let's say maybe AI or enterprise architecture or technology innovation management, blockchain, etc. They focus on very specific areas. The emerging tech hype cycle looks across all of the hype cycles and plucks from each one of those 30 to 40 technologies that make the most sense to be on this list, essentially the must watch list. Now, another little wrinkle here is to get on this list, we're looking not in the typical 2 to 3 year range as most hype cycles will look at these technologies, but rather, the emerging technology hype cycle is looking out over the next 5 to 10 years. So this is a much longer, much more extended time frame for these technologies. So you're going to see that very clear, represented on the hype cycle, because you're going to see all those technologies are to the left, and there isn't a balance, and it looks kind of off when you look at the emerging technologies hype cycle. So you'll see sometimes Gartner will sprinkle one or two over on the right-hand side of the hype cycle and the trough of disillusionment or the plateau of productivity, just to kind of balance things out a little bit. But, what I find both through my experience there and as an outsider, typically this is just to play service to balance and not make it look so uneven. But keep in mind, this is what the hype cycle was built for, the emerging technologies hype cycle, that is. And so another key aspect here is that when we talk about the must watch list, really what we're looking at here is the technologies that will offer the most transforming behaviors, and that will provide organizations with a degree of competitive advantage. And so it's very, very specific on what we're looking for here, as far as to qualify to be on that list. And so Gartner's going through, approximately 2,000. I think this past year it's less than that. They whittled down that list quite a bit. But nonetheless, it's a lot of technologies to sift through. And so here is the emerging technologies hype cycle. Keep in mind that this report is an extremely lengthy report. It's, over 30 pages long. There's multiple visuals, there's multiple components to it. Think about it in three primary sections. You've got the visual that you see here, which is by far the most popular and what people tend to gravitate towards. You have the trends that are exposed as a result of all those individual technologies. And so you'll see those represented. And in some cases, I've seen some authors of the hype cycle use these more as categorization or grouping. When I was at Gartner writing this report, I actually led with the trends, and the trends informed the technologies that should go on the list because I wanted to make sure that it represented the movement of the marketplace. So, like I said, there's three parts. That's the second part. And then the third part is the definitions for each one of these. There is, a good, half page to a page long of content where the analyst will provide a summary of each one of these technologies. So, as we talked about on the previous episode, where we talked about the hype cycle generically, you've got the major stages. You see that the majority of the technologies here are on the left hand side, which makes sense for the time horizons in which we're talking about. So, what I want to do is I want us to pay attention to the colors in the iconography of these dots. You'll notice that they're different colors, and some are even a different shape. So you see some are triangles. So here's the decoder ring. If it's an empty bubble, that means right now. So these are technologies that are going to immediately mature to the plateau of productivity. Now, keep in mind also, before I go into, and talk about time dimensions, the time is based on when these technologies will reach the plateau of productivity, not the time in which you should use these technologies. That is up to you, and it's based on your innovation strategy. There are other models that do a better job of articulating the maturity of the technology. This model is primarily focused on the market perception. It's about calibrating expectations for you as folks that are adopting these technologies. So the empty circles are right now. The light blue ones, so embedded AI, bring your own identity, the ontologies and graphs, low cost single board, etc. These are 2 years away. The dark blue are 2 to 5 years away. So the adaptive machine learning, the expandable AI, carbon-based transistors, authenticated provenance, etc. These are 2 to 5 years to get to that plateau of productivity. Now, the triangles are 10 plus years. And so those are the much, much longer range technologies. You'll notice many of the triangles are at the very, very low end of that hype cycle. And I usually think of that lower left-hand corner as more of, R&D, research, laboratory type of stuff. As you get to the halfway point above, usually these are technologies that are out of the lab and have some sort of commercial application to them. And so this is a bit of an eye chart. There's a lot here. There's a lot to decipher. What I would recommend that you guys think about is, when you look at these dots on the hype cycle, pay attention to the time horizon where it's at on the hype cycle, because that's going to represent its velocity. So if you've got, the further back the light blues and the empty circles are to the left hand side, That's telling us that there is an extremely fast velocity that these are going to move quickly in the marketplace. And so, composable enterprise, which arguably I'm not sure why that's on there, but composable enterprise, what that says at that mark is that this is going to move very quickly and find that in a much, much different position next year. So, going to pause for just a second so that you guys can take just take this in. There's a lot here. You see things like health passport is an empty circle there towards the beginning. I would say, yeah, that might be right, especially at the time in which this was written. But you can already see even where things are at today. That's moved much, much further along. And so this gives us some framework of reference on how to look at these emerging technologies. I would definitely recommend using this list, and you can actually download the raw technology profiles into an Excel spreadsheet. That's called the My Hype Cycle Toolkit. So if you're a Gartner subscriber, I would definitely get a hold of that, especially if you run an innovation program, because what that's going to do is it's going to give you a common vocabulary and taxonomy for these technologies, at least a starting point. You could rename everything if you wanted, but it gives you some good baseline data of a bunch of analysts that have done research around this, and that's research you don't have to do. So how I look at it is I look at that as extremely valuable. So if we move on here, the second key area that I talked about was the trends. And this year there were 5 core trends. There was composite architectures, algorithmic trust, formative AI, beyond silicon, and digital me. So if we walked through each one of those, which we'll do here in a minute. But before we do that, see, I'm getting ahead of myself here, guys. I wanted to do a quick analysis of the past few years on how these things have evolved. And so where I started was a year or two after I actually started writing this hype cycle, and I felt fairly confident because I wrote these reports, the meaning behind these, and my last report that I wrote was in 2018. And so what you can see here is the carry forward of some of these trends. And what I've done here is I've color coded these. So you can see the dark colors show kind of a direct lineage. And then as it gets lighter in shade is the more disconnected it is. And the arrows are essentially the connective tissue between these. So you can see, we went from AI everywhere to democratized AI to advanced AI and analytics to now formative AI. I can tell you they're all pretty much meaning the same things. There's some subtleties behind it, but based on what I understand of this, and I've read the report, it's very, very close to the original intention of that theme. I did make a change from AI everywhere to democratized AI very deliberately and didn't keep it the same because with democratized AI, I felt it was important to emphasize not only that AI is everywhere, but also it's accessible to everyone. And I thought that was a really important thing to call out as the trend, because it's one thing to have it everywhere and not accessible to everyone, and it's yet a completely other thing to have it accessible to most people that want to have access to it. Transparently immersive experiences. You can see there that after 2018, it started to kind of look a little bit different. You could do a dotted line to digital ecosystems. You could do dotted line to augmented humans and digital me. There's lots of dotted lines there, but it pretty much dies in 2019. Digital ecosystems, and which started out as digital platforms, which I felt when I renamed it that digital ecosystems represented that much more holistically as a trend. And so that has carried forward for the most part. You can see that in 2020, um, I would say composable architecture and algorithmic trust are two key components of a digital ecosystem. So in my personal opinion, I think we took somewhat of a step back from where we were heading, especially when we're talking 5 to 10 years out. Algorithmic trust, guys, we already have that today. It's called blockchain. Why didn't we just call it blockchain? For the other one here for composite architecture, again, this is not a new paradigm, at least in my mind. I wrote a short book about that back in 2006 as an example. So I think that one, there's some subtleties in the definition that Gartner gave, but it's largely what you would expect. The DIY biohacking moved to augmented humans. Okay, get that. And then again, here in 2020, we've got this representation of digital me. And again, the scope, I feel like it was much broader. And now it's kind of reined in a whole lot more. And I think if you do that, which is fine to do that, I think you have to expand your number of trends. I think you have to get into the specifics of some of these other trends because, I still feel that, biohacking is going to play a major role in society, whether it is the least intrusive with wearables and their role to the things that are very intrusive, where you've got organs and you're 4D printing things, there's, CRISPR and, DIY gene editing. This is going to become a huge ethical issue. And I think that organizations really need to get in front of that. The infrastructure side, ubiquitous infrastructure shifted to post-classical computing. What that reads to me is it reads quantum, because in the how we talk about quantum is it's a binary, it's either classical computing or it's quantum. So that seems to be quantum. So with ubiquitous infrastructure again in 2019, it looks like it narrowed a bit and focused on just one of the things that we identified in 2018. And then beyond silicon, this from a naming perspective was a little confusing. I get some of the DNA stuff. I am skeptical of the practicality of that, though. And when we talked about ubiquitous infrastructure, that was talking about the broader infrastructure and the things that went into it. So next generation communications technology. So, and I'm not talking about 5G, because 5G, we were talking about that in 2018. I'm talking about, the 6G spec. I'm talking about the next version of the Wi-Fi standard that we know these things are coming. It's not if, it's when. The standards are being ratified. The technology will be built. So we should talk about it. And we should talk about the opportunities that unlocks. At least that's just me, guys. You guys be the judge for yourself. So real quickly, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time here because we can get down a rabbit hole. But going through each one of these trends and showing you from the hype cycle which technologies got mapped to these trends, I think is interesting. So composite architectures talks about the composable enterprise that can allow companies to respond to a shifting business landscape. Business capabilities are available inside a flexible data fabric, leveraging capabilities such as embedded AI, low-cost single-board computers at the edge. You know what this screams to me? It screams digital ecosystems. That's what that says. And if you look at the definition for digital ecosystems, that's a lot of what it is. But digital ecosystems is a lot more than that. It's dynamic, it's composable, it's orchestratable, etc. It's taking it's enabling a platform business model. And so again, I think this is a bit of a narrowing. And again, that's not wrong necessarily, but again, you should add other trends to the list. Also, I want to challenge, if it's a digital ecosystem that you're talking about, just call it a digital ecosystem. Stop renaming these damn trends. Let's have some consistency. Consistency is not necessarily a bad thing. The world is moving really, really quickly, and we shouldn't make things more complicated than they need to be. So some of these technologies here in that composite architectures are composable enterprise, which is not a technology. It's a trend, which I'll have to say, from the previous versions of the hype cycle, one of the very specific rules that I had made with the emerging tech hype cycle when I wrote it was the emerging technologies hype cycle. It wasn't the emerging technologies and trends and everything else hype cycle, but I made sure that we just kept it to technologies and handled trends separately, because trends are different than products and services and individual technologies. They should be looked at and viewed differently. And I think it adds complexity and potentially confusion when you try to compare apples to apples to something that's apples and oranges on a hype cycle. So package business capabilities, again, that's more of an approach. Data fabric, it sounds like that's more kind of graph types of technologies. Private 5G, okay. Again, very, very specific. I'm not sure why private 5G is different than all up 5G, but okay. Embedded AI, okay. Again, we've been talking about this for years, and that seems again to go more kind of trendish instead of something very specific. In years past, we actually called out the technology. We said custom silicon, and the examples of that were TPUs, Apple's Bionic chipset, FPGA technologies, etc. And calling out those very specific technologies, I think, is really important, because when you are so generic, it's not actionable. And we want to make sure this stuff is actionable. Low cost single board computers at the edge. Is this Raspberry Pi? So I think that is, again, very generic, and I'm not sure exactly what that means. Personally, I would just say IoT, and IoT comes in many different flavors. The trend could be it's affordable and you're enabling a maker community. But again, I'm adding critique here, and that's not what this is about necessarily. The second trend here that Gartner had identified was algorithmic trust. So the definition here for this trend that they had called out here was algorithmic trust models replace trust-based models based on responsible authorities. Okay. We're going to interject a reality check here. Are you talking about blockchain? This is very, very similar to a blockchain pitch. They do call it the trust protocol. They do talk about disrupting intermediaries, the middlemen, and as we put it here, models based on responsible authorities. Algorithmic trust helps ensure companies won't be exposed to the risk and costs of losing the trust of their stakeholders. So with this trend, it's tough to really understand exactly and put your finger on what this means and how actionable it is. It seems to be a way to say blockchain without saying blockchain. Because another thing was blockchain was removed from the hype cycle this year, which I found really, really strange that the hype cycle was uh, removed that technology. It removed quantum from the list, believe it or not. It hasn't even gotten past the hump yet, and it was removed off the list. And it's going to be a wildly transformational technology. I'm not sure what you guys are thinking here. I would love to know what you're thinking around this because it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But again, I wasn't there sitting in the rooms doing the research this time. So I'll have to trust that there were some good reasons for that. So some of the technologies they include here are Secure Access Service Edge, um, Differential Privacy, Authenticated Provenance, Bring Your Own Identity, Responsible AI, and Explainable AI. Seems a stretch for some of these to be grouped together here for this algorithmic trust. I can see kind of the inferences on why some of these would be here, and I definitely get that. But it's kind of a strange combination. And again, all these are very blockchain-esque things. Provenance is a major value prop for blockchain. Security at the edge is a major benefit of blockchain. Identity is one of a huge value prop of blockchain. I'm not sure what differential privacy means, to be honest with you. Responsible and explainable AI, in theory, should be in the AI piece of the equation here. And AI is a foundational layer across all this stuff. Keep that in mind as well. So formative AI, speaking of AI, that's the third trend, and how Gartner is defining that is it's a set of emerging AI and related technologies that can adapt and respond to changes in the business landscape. The most advanced forms of this technology can produce new business models to solve specific problems. Examples include AI augmented development and generative adversarial networks, or sometimes referred to as GANs. Okay, makes sense. I'm not sure why we had to rename it to formative AI. I'm not sure what the justification there was, and maybe it was to make sure it looked new and bright and shiny and something you had to pay attention to and it wasn't boring. That may be the case. I don't know. So some of the technologies include AI augmented design, augmented development, ontologies and graphs, small data, composite AI, advanced ML, supervised learning, generative AI, and GANs. So it's interesting. So to be honest with you, with the AI space, some of the things that I'm really struggling with here on this list, just to be very honest with you guys know that I'm fairly blunt about this stuff. Supervised learning, really, guys? Supervised learning? That's not 5 to 10 years out. That's not an emerging technology. At least in my mind, it's not. It's fairly mainstream in my mind. Yes, ontologies and graphs, but I would tend to focus more on the dynamic ontologies rather than those technologies. Small data, I'm not sure what that is. I think a big miss here is synthetic data. I think that's a huge miss. I think it's a huge miss that all the autonomous stuff is gone from here. The promise of autonomous robotics, autonomous vehicles, all this stuff that's on the cusp in that time horizon of that 5 to 10 year mark, uh, is not on the list. I'm super, super surprised about this, to be very honest with you guys. Um, GANs definitely needs to be there. Adaptive machine learning, I mean, I think that is a stretch. I would much rather see uh, reinforcement learning here. I don't see that on here. I don't see, oh, I don't see unsupervised learning on here either. So you've got one pillar of three in the narrow AI space that's not represented. Now, also, you don't have uh, the uh, the general AI, i.e., the Terminator version of AI on here, and that could be a flip of a coin whether or not you put it on here. Futurist debate when we're actually going to see a glimmer of that. Personally, I think we're really far away from it based on the initiatives that I've seen with some of the other AI based technologies. So, with this one, I'm happy that they kept the trend, kind of the category. Uh, I'm scratching my head here a bit about the specific technologies that were chosen for this. These don't seem future. These don't seem like they should be in that 5 to 10 years highly transformative category as the hype cycle is defined, not by me, but by Gartner on their website and in the report itself. So I think that one, you get excited when you read the title, and then it's a bit of a letdown when you actually jump in. Trend 4, beyond silicon. How Gartner is defining this is that its technology is reaching the physical limits of silicon, opening the door to new advanced materials to enable the creation of faster and smaller technologies. Where's quantum computing on this list? I mean, that should be the very first one here. Instead, the technology that are put on here is DNA computing and storage, biodegradable sensors, carbon-based transistors. Again, this is a bit of a letdown. I'm sorry, guys. I love you guys over there. I've got a small place in my heart for you, and I know a lot of the people that contributed to this. But I got to be honest here. Wow, biodegradable sensors, and you didn't put nanotechnology on here. I mean, that's more important than biodegradable sensors. Carbon-based transistors. Okay. What about all the new battery and energy tech? DNA storage, and processing, you're gonna put that over quantum computing. Again, I'm scratching my head and I'm trying to be positive here, everybody, but I am scratching my head a bit on this one. This seems, again, a bit of a letdown. The final trend, digital me. The description that Gartner gives is that digital passports and social distancing technologies will enable digital representations of people to move past screens and keyboards using a combination of interaction modalities. Okay. I'm not sure if that's 5 or 10 years out. That's right now. That's not 5 to 10 years out. That is where society is moving. I would, if I was king for the day, I would say, I would name that trend the touchless world. And the evolution to touchless given where we're at. But that's a near-term trend. That's not a long-term trend. So this one, let's give it a chance. Let's see what technologies are included here. Social distancing technologies, also known as contact tracing apps. Okay. Health passport, digital twin of a person, a citizen twin, which arguably could be the same thing. Multi-experience, two-way BMI, brain machine interface. Okay. Looking at these technologies, if I count here, we got the social distancing technologies, 1, health passport, 2, multi-experience, 3. I would say 3 of these, again, are right now technologies. There's nothing emerging or transformational about these from a future perspective. Yes, they're transforming industries right this second, and a lot of cases required. Because once the government starts making laws where you have to do it, it shouldn't be on this list. Let's be very honest with ourselves here. And where I get disappointed here, guys, is the process for this hype cycle is all about distilling all those technologies. There's 2,000 technologies, distilling all those down to a finite set, to that 30 to 40. And I think that there was a little over 30 technologies. They didn't maximize the 40, and it's not an actual official rule that's written down anywhere. You could probably go over 40, but the general rule and consensus is you don't go over 40. But there wasn't any pushing the envelope. I remember when I was doing this, it was a struggle to remove technologies off the list because of how impactful those technologies could be in the future. And so to see, especially digital twin of a person and see the citizen twin, I would have just said digital twin and, maybe put in parentheses, representation of people. But even with the digital me, you're going to want to simulate and you want to show digital twins in a city capacity, a building capacity. So you have to you can't just simulate the person, you have to simulate everything around it. So again, I'm talking myself out of any sort of distinction on people and talking myself back into just call it digital twin. That's the technology. That's the thing that's important. Not citizen twin, a very specific version of that, an implementation, and a very narrow version of just people. And then two-way BMI, I think that's super on point for this one. But again, I look at this trend, and a lot of this is today. And a lot of this is not really pushing the envelope. I feel like this year's hype cycle, if we go back here to actually look at this hype cycle, I don't know. Are they playing it? Is Gartner playing it safe here with the hype cycle? I feel like this wasn't random, kind of taking the trends and making them much more narrow, talking about technologies that are here today and used today. It's not necessarily super futuristic as the advertising, the promise is for this thing. So yeah, I think this needs some more dissection. And so over the next few weeks, I think what we want to do here is let's run a series. I'm going to invite Gartner to come on the podcast. And so I'm going to invite Gartner to come on, and we're going to walk through some of this. And, I'll ask, hopefully we get the author of this hype cycle to come on and walk us through some of the rationale for the decisions that were made around this particular hype cycle. I really want to give them an opportunity to be able to explain this, because I think, listen, we're all super busy. and it's, you're paying for a service, you're paying for advisory, you're paying for the research. Um, I think there needs to be a better disclaimer on approaches to these things and a little bit more transparency and maybe even a little bit more rigor in the process itself. But again, let's talk to Gartner, and hopefully they accept the invite and they come on. I'm not paying you guys, so don't ask. I'm doing this as a hobby, not as a monetization model here. So first, I think I went through what are hype cycles. Number one, number two, have gone through the emerging technologies hype cycle as well. Third, let's give Gartner the opportunity to talk about this. And then fourth, what I want to do is I actually want to bring a panel of experts on. And we've already got this lined up. We've got someone from the venture capital community. And so we're going to get a very important perspective here from that person that's going to give us insights into how to make decisions on betting on the future. Because that's what VCs are all about. They're betting on the future. It's highly ambiguous. So what are some of the things they think about? Do they use the hype cycle? I'm not sure. I've asked a few in the past, and they've told me they don't. And they didn't give me great reasons why they didn't. So it'd be good to have an open dialogue. Two, I've got a person from academia coming on, and they're going to talk about long-range research projects, but also what's taught in the classroom. And how this can be used for folks in like an MBA program, as an example. Second, I've got a leader in a Fortune 100 US based company. And they're going to provide some insights. This person runs an innovation organization, and I want to get their perspective on this year's hype cycle and see if they agree with some of the things that we've discovered here today. And then lastly, I want to bring on a consultant from a big top firm that is working with customers with their innovation programs, helping with digital transformation initiatives, and kind of can see that bigger picture. And so I think that perspective is going to be really important. Oh, and lastly, we'll give the big evil vendor perspective. So I will participate on this as well, and provide some of my perspectives on this. So stay tuned. We've got lots of really, really, really good stuff coming up here over the next few weeks. I'm going to trickle these out over, week by week. So you have a series of these. So again, like always, I try to post as much as I can on our blog for the podcast on vnextpod.com. So hopefully you guys will go on there. I'll post some resources on there, some commentary, some links and references, etc. But also make sure that you subscribe to this YouTube channel, subscribe to the podcast through your podcast if you're listening to the audio version, because I do both at the same time. So it's kind of hard to tell you which one to do. But if you do both, like and subscribe on YouTube, and for the audio version, definitely subscribe. So listen, guys, thank you for spending the time walking through this. Hopefully this was helpful, and I look forward to continuing to dive deeper into the emerging technologies hype cycle. Talk soon.